The end of the issue has Stephanie confiding in Cass how Batman fired her as Robin, and that she'll show him and everyone they were wrong about her, and that she's an effective crime fighter. And thus, Wargames, the major Batman storyline at the time, and one of the dumbest. It's like the reverse of No Man's Land. Wears out its welcome quickly, too complicated, everyone's stupid, and full of unnecessary death and despair. The basic idea is that Spoiler finds one of Batman's contingency plans of what would happen if there were a bunch of gang wars going on in Gotham, a plan that would end up uniting all of the criminal gangs in Gotham under the control of one person, Matches Malone. Bruce is often used disguise when infiltrating the underworld. However, not realizing that Matches Malone is Bruce, she tries to implement the plan and ends up just igniting a massive gang war. I listed off a few problems with it already, but I can give you one of the biggest ones about why fundamentally this story is stupid. No one cares about Gotham's mobs. Sure, of course there's massive amounts of organized crime in Gotham. That's part of its whole deal. But I bet most Batman readers could name, like, 2 crime lords off the top of their heads, maybe. I guess Falcone for his presence in a lot of highly celebrated stories, and Tony Zuko because of his part in Dick Grayson's origin story. Sure, Batman fights crime, and there are good stories relating to Gotham's crime families, but a mob war is not exactly a page-turner when a lot of these players might have some connection to previously established ones, but certainly not any that have any kind of staying power. No Man's Land featured a ton of Batman villains operating as lords of their own, and they're all memorable and twisted in their own right, with stories of survival and humanity in the face of overwhelming despair. Most of these people in Wargames are just gangsters and completely interchangeable. The story's just about constant violence and mob politics. And in fact, they felt the need to bring in a supervillain to actually make it interesting enough. Black Mask, who in my opinion is really not that compelling a character. A mobster with a gimmick and a sickening sadistic streak that would eventually get him murdered by Catwoman. Like, the thing that makes him interesting is that he's got a black skull mask on, which just makes him the Red Skull, but with less Nazism and a palette swap. There's more I could get into here, but like I said last time, this is stuff I'll probably talk about when I eventually do a Stephanie Brown retrospective. The end result of Wargames is that Black Mask tortures and murders, well, sort of murders, long story there, Stephanie Brown, as well as that other character I briefly mentioned last time, Gavin King, and manages to take control of all of Gotham's crime families. Truly a satisfying conclusion and story development that... yeah, whatever. Let's get back to talking about Cass. For a while, the writer of the book was Dylan Horrocks, and his run was actually pretty good. All the stuff related to the Batman relationship around issue 50 was his doing. But of course, writing teams change hands, and thus afterwards we get our final writer for the book, Anderson Gabrich. In the wake of Wargames, a number of Bat supporting characters like Cassandra relocated to Bludhaven, Gotham's much worse sister city that Nightwing called home. It starts off with a crossover with Robin that contains one of the sweetest panels of Cassandra that you may have seen floating around the net of her trying to read. It's wonderful, and we see the friendship between Tim and Cass develop a little. They meet with the Bludhaven Police Department, which apparently is a little more amenable these days to vigilantes than they were during Nightwing's initial run. I'm not so big on supporting underage costumed vigilantes, and your partner here seems a little aloof. Yes, well, Batgirl prefers to watch. Yeah, Cass's face here kind of mirrors our own in regards to the implications of that one, Tim. At the end of the crossover, Cass recognizes that Tim may not want to be Batman, not be like him at all, but she does. She'd love to take over for him when he's gone, though we see in her a bit of a dark streak, feeling confined by the law to do what she feels needs to be done to stop evil. It's why there is something to be said for plot details that happen later, but the execution was what was so lacking. Anyway, Alfred helps her set up in a new house for herself, showing her her own private Batcave and other resources that she can take advantage of while building a civilian life for herself. In the meantime, though, the Penguin relocated to Bludhaven in the wake of not only the gang war, but the death of the main gang lord of Bludhaven, Blockbuster. Unfortunately, that also puts Cass up against frequent Teen Titans and Doom Patrol villains, the Brotherhood of Evil, nearly getting killed by them, and getting a ghostly visit from Spoiler, who walks her through her own life. It's similar to an event that happened with Nightwing when he was knocked out and the ghost of Jason Todd walked him through his own history. Amusingly enough, in both cases, the person they were talking to was retconned into being not dead. One of the changes Gabrich brings to the book is Cass recording her thoughts in an audio journal, and it's pretty effective, giving us a bit more insight into her. While the silent stuff early on was really good, this gives us more of a peek into her that's not entirely reliant upon the artwork, which, as I've said, was not the best when it started. This stuff is done by Ale Garza, who definitely brings his A-game to the book and keeps models consistent and fights entertaining, while still bringing with it strong emotions and heart. Gabrich starts establishing a supporting cast for Cass, mainly in the form of a coffee shop owner named Brenda, who's an ex-con. But unfortunately, we don't learn much about her because the book was cancelled before we could do so, namely due to what happens when the Penguin's deal with the Brotherhood of Evil is broken off. The Penguin instead gets help from another group of villains, a much larger society of them. It was late 2004, and if you'll recall both my review of it and my mentioning of it in the Blue Beetle retrospective, well, you'll know what's coming. Infinite Crisis was on the horizon, and the build-up to that event comic had begun in earnest. The Penguin hires Deathstroke the Terminator to deal with Batgirl, and we get some insight for what it's like for her to take on an opponent like him. His body moves like a choir, many different voices, all at once, but singing too fast, too loud. It's also singing a Taylor Swift song for some reason. However, he just toys with her for a bit. After all, as skilled and powerful as he is, Batgirl still defeated Shiva, and that's no small feat. If Batman and Nightwing are capable of taking down Slade, then he needs an edge against her body-reading ability. Enter his daughter, Rose Wilson, aka Ravager, at this point a villain. Rose has a precognitive ability. Nothing too spectacular, but she can see a few seconds into the future, and thus allows her to anticipate attacks by an opponent, much like how Batgirl can anticipate movement based on body language. Thus, the two are a bit more of an even match, but she's inexperienced and juiced up on a serum that Deathstroke has been giving her. Ravager's body moves like her father's. It sings. Less, voices than him. Her body is singing a Maroon 5 song, which just seems even weirder. As with the rest of the book, it's a further parallel on the issues of fathers and daughters. Cassandra can tell that Slade wants to be proud of Rose and her successes, even while literally drugging her to make her like this. She gets under his skin by calling him pathetic, then defeats Rose by taking advantage of her own desire to please her father, the same instinct that she once had herself in relation to David Cain and Batman. In the following issue, a question by Brenda makes Cassandra start to really seriously question who her parentage is. Not just David, but her mother. She talks to Batman about it, and they both have the same suspicion, that her mother is actually Shiva. He points out some continuity, that there was a time where he thought Shiva might have been Jason Todd's mother, long story, but Shiva swept that idea pretty thoroughly under the rug. She even goes to her father to ask him, violently, but he refuses to answer, having made a promise to keep it secret. This leads us into the penultimate storyline, though one could argue it's all one big storyline. Destruction's daughter. Cassandra heads out on the road to try to find Lady Shiva, retracing her own journey thanks to a photo Batman had of Shiva and her sister at a martial arts tournament. She was almost stopped from becoming Lady Shiva if she had just won that tournament, but then these teenagers from Angel Grove won it, and she's been bitter ever since. Cass hits a bit of a snag when she goes to the only address they have for Shiva, an old apartment complex, and the old lady she was talking to turns into an OMAC. Her next attempt at finding her brings her to the Bronze Tiger, a former member of the League of Assassins, as well as the Suicide Squad, who explains some more previously unknown details concerning her backstory. It had been said that Cassandra was not David Cain's first attempt at creating a perfect assassin, but every other child he had tried to train had failed. Only a few survived infancy, and the ones that did turned on each other. The whole thing was under the direction of Ra's al Ghul, who wanted to create the next generation of assassins. After the previous failures, Cain tried a different idea. Instead of a single man training a new league, the league would train one child. And that ended up being Cassandra. Shiva was the only one who didn't participate, wanting to save her for later, no doubt part of her death wish. With all of her leads dried up, there's only one place for Cass to go for help. Back to Oracle, who hadn't spoken to her since the events of Wargames. With her help, they track Shiva down, in the middle of some kind of big brouhaha with the League of Assassins, which is now under the direction of Nyssa Ratko, one of Ra's al Ghul's children. The two finally have a conversation and make up for what happened, Oracle even discussing why she has so much difficulty reading and writing despite her continued practice. The parts of her brain normally responsible for it are kind of scattered across both hemispheres. She is capable of reading and writing, but they need to discover a different approach to it. Perhaps a form of sign language, but with martial arts instead. A punch to the right side of the face is A, a punch to the left side is B! Batgirl breaks into the stronghold of the League of Assassins, and we see Nyssa, who apparently forgot to put on a shirt this morning under her cape and skin-tight leather overalls, or whatever the hell you call an outfit like this, who allows her to break in because she's curious about Cassandra and what it is she intends to do. She drops her right into Shiva, who's training a group of assassins. Among them, surprisingly enough, is Alpha from the end of last time. Shiva says that these are to be Cassandra's students, basically trying to make this a big recruitment speech. Cass is having none of it, and the two fight, Shiva explaining that her defeat humbled her and gave her a reason to learn again, to further improve herself. Cass asks the question of if Shiva is her mother, but she ignores it, just exposing her face more by ripping off parts of the Batgirl mask. However, before they can get much deeper into the things, Nyssa unveils one of her own new minions, Mr. Freeze. We'll get back to him in a second, but with Cassandra literally on ice, she's forced to watch Shiva training, making her speculate about Alpha's presence, since he had changed. Something big is going down that made him want to be a part of this. Nyssa shows off a Lazarus Pit to Cassandra. I assume most of you are familiar with it, but in case you're not, it's basically a naturally occurring pit of goo that can bring the dead or dying back to life, or keep you young for hundreds of years. Ra's al Ghul uses them a lot, but Nyssa's is unique because she's made it reusable, as opposed to a one-time use that the pits normally are. Nyssa's also working with the Society, hoping to use them to accomplish the long-term goals of the League of Assassin, world domination and all that. She tries to offer Batgirl a chance to join them and be everything the League originally wanted her to be, and not Batman. You're limited by his ideals, his dogma. He shelters you from the real world, keeps you naive, ignorant, stupid. It's why he never taught you to read.
Okay, confession time. I'm actually not that good at reading either. I devoted all of my childhood and teenage years to becoming, me. So I just kind of invented a bat reading device that just reads something off through contact lenses and then transmits it to my ears.
Nyssa presses all of Batgirl's buttons, not wanting to be limited by the law, the father issues with Batman, the inequality and oppression she witnessed, even questioning the idea of heroes not killing simply because Batman told her so. Although she probably doesn't know about Cass's whole watching someone die in the form of body language was traumatizing for me thing. Mr. Freeze is working for Nyssa in the hopes of restoring his wife to normal using the pit, but Cass is able to convince him to join forces with her, thinking they can restore her to life without Nyssa's help. They do so, tossing her into the Lazarus Pit, and she comes back out messed up. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about the Lazarus Pits, when you first come out of them, you're kind of insane. And the pit wasn't actually adjusted properly to deal with Nora Freeze's unique circumstances, so she comes out as an insane supervillain who can wield the Lazarus Pit energy as some kind of power to resurrect the dead. She renamed herself Lazara, and naturally every other writer after this completely ignored it ever happened, which was for the best. No one needed Mr. Freeze's wife to become some kind of weird, insane necromancer who hated him. Admittedly, it's up to you if that's better or worse than what they did with her in the New 52, but I digress. Freeze detonates a freezing bomb he had been working with the League of Assassins on to try to stop Nora, as Batgirl leads a group of Shiva's assassins in training to escape. Alpha also ran away. He had become convinced again that once a killer, always a killer, but Batgirl just saying, Nah, that's not how that works, was apparently enough to make him run off. Alpha, the most easily led assassin ever. I bet you could convince him he was still suffering from amnesia if you talked to him enough. Anyway, final storyline. Like I said, the final arc, Blood Matters, is pretty much just a continuation of Destruction's daughter, and picks up right where we left off. Shiva bringing the remaining trainees down on Cass and her little band of trainees. Batgirl is able to take them all on herself, pointing out that they'll never be Shiva's heir. They're limited by their styles of combat. Batgirl and Shiva don't really have a defined style. They're just fighting, reading their opponents better than anyone else. Unfortunately, it ends up for naught, as there was still one of Shiva's little team that hadn't been properly introduced. Mad Dog. As said earlier, Cassandra was not David Cain's first attempt at creating a perfect assassin child. Mad Dog was, but the kind of training they tried to do broke his mind and made him psychopathic and wild. Alpha does show back up again to help Cass, so at least that plot thread wasn't completely worthless, with Batgirl insisting that he not try to kill Mad Dog. They fight, and Batgirl is able to knock him out, but not before getting a great big old dagger through her chest. However, Shiva shows up and is pissed, refusing to let Cassandra die like this. Oh good, she can just punch her back to life again! Right through the hole in her. Well, crap. She is the hero. I am not. Never have been. Yeah, I think we got that idea already. What with you being, an assassin, training other assassins, and having worshippers who claim you to be the god of destruction. Ghost Stephanie Brown shows up again as we lead into the final issue of Cassandra's solo series. This was right in the middle of Infinite Crisis, and Ghost Steph shows off what happened to Bludhaven, the society dropping chemo on it and, well, blowing it up. Considering the retcon about Steph being alive, it's most likely this is all an hallucination with information spoken to her by Lady Shiva, who drops Cassandra into the Lazarus Pits to save her life. She also apparently decided to raid Nyssa's wardrobe and put on this whatever the hell this outfit is.
There. Sure glad I don't look stupid in this.
Shiva admits that indeed she's Cassandra's mother and helps her work through her Lazarus Pit-induced temporary insanity while explaining why she agreed to Cain's plan to create the perfect assassin child between them, though it also inspired her to begin her own quest to become Lady Shiva. And thus the two begin their final battle, making it clear that this time, one of them ain't walking away from it. And Cassandra, needing to emulate her mother's style, decides she needs some strategically placed rips on her costume to show off more boob. The fight is shorter, but no less effective, and Shiva accepts her fate as Cass snaps her neck. But it doesn't kill her. She does die from the injury, but Cassandra has a compromise. Much in the same way Shiva brought her back to life after killing her and fulfilling her death wish, she has killed Shiva and tosses her onto a hook hanging above the reusable Lazarus Pit. We see the hook struggling to hold her up above it as Cass walks away, the narration echoing the story we'd been told about her history during the storyline. Once upon a time, there was a girl, born to be something unlike the world had ever seen. A dancing hunter. She performed in off-Broadway productions that each ended with a dead stage manager. But she didn't want that, and so she ran away. Hungry and desperate, she found salvation in the dark flap of wings. She thought she was a bat, but she came to find she wasn't that either. She was only a runaway girl named Cain. But the truth is that Cassandra is more than that. She's a hero through and through, and she is most certainly not a killer. If her solo series was about anything else, it was indeed that, her rejection of the expectation others put on her, making it clear that redemption is indeed possible, that there is always another way, another chance to be something nobler, that your parentage and the destiny that they intend for you is not necessarily what you must become. At least it was a message that worked until higher-ups decided, nah, screw that noise. When we conclude the Cassandra Caintrospective next time, we'll explore a few bits I didn't get a chance to cover during this, the ruination she suffered, as well as her redemption from that, and beyond.
I'm sitting on
End of story. Take it from me. I know, things never end the way you want them to. But sometimes they do, Stephanie, which is why you weren't actually dead. Sometimes complaining to management is absolutely worth it. Hello, my friends. Please be sure to like this video, subscribe, hit the bell, and share it with others. And if you get a chance, maybe check out my Patreon.